Hello again, viewers of Twill.tv. Verizon sent me another device to take a look at, and I've only had it for a few days, but I thought it was about time to go ahead and make a review of it before I head out to CES. This little guy, if you call it little guy, is the HTC One Max. Now, if you've seen my HTC One review that I made a few months ago, you'll know that it's one of my favorite smartphones on the market at the moment. I love the build quality, I love the speed, the performance, the design. I love pretty much everything about it, except the camera, and the battery life was kind of in the middle of the road. Battery life on the One wasn't really all that bad, but it was something that could have stood to be improved a little bit. Well, in many ways, the One Max seems to want to address the issues that a lot of people had with the HTC One, except it is almost identical in every way, except that it is larger. It has a 5.9-inch 1080p display, where the HTC One had a 4.7-inch 1080p display. Has the exact same camera, processor, RAM, internal storage, although the HTC One had the option of 32 or 64 gigs of storage. The One Max has only 32 gigs, according to the HTC website. However, the HTC One Max has the option of using micro SD storage. So if you pop the back off like this, there you go. You've got a little micro SD card slot there, as well as the easily accessible SIM slot when you take this strange, I believe it's aluminum backplate off. Still no user replaceable battery, but since it is a 3300 milliamp hour battery, replacing the battery is not going to be a huge deal, and because you can take the back off when that time comes, if that time ever comes, to have to replace it, it shouldn't be a big deal to have someone else disassemble it if you had to have it done. But like I said, for the most part, the rest of it is almost identical, so if you want to know my thoughts on it, you can watch my HTC One video. The biggest differences, though, are the screen size, which means that the pixel density on the One Max is going to be a little bit lower. It's still much, much higher than the human eye can really see, so it does still look beautiful. It is still an amazing display. If you hadn't noticed it already, there's a little black box here on the back. That is a fingerprint scanner, fingerprint sensor, which you can use to unlock the device. And actually, in my testing, it worked surprisingly well. I could do it from just a slightly off angle and have it still work. You could program in up to 10 fingers, so you could have multiple people using it or use multiple fingers, which is what I was doing. I would have one finger and then I could swip it over to the other hand and have that other finger on the other hand. Very, very convenient, although when I'm using a device, a lot of times I'll have it laying down on a desk, which means in order to unlock it at that point, I'd have to pick it up and then swipe my finger down the back. So minor inconvenience, hashtag first world problems type stuff. And another interesting feature, one thing I kind of forgot to point out there, is these three little dots here that I didn't really notice until someone pointed it out over on Google Plus the day I took a picture of it when I first got it. These three are Pogo pin plugs. And so far, there's only been one accessory announced that's going to take advantage of it. They have a charging case that will go over the outside. It's kind of like a Mophie case, but it's a case that goes over the back and flips a cover over the front. And so you can have your device protected and while at the same time charge it. So interesting. Not sure how much I would use it with the 3300 milliamp hour battery, but still, for somebody who is extremely heavy on the usage, could be useful. And really the last thing I saw that was different between the two devices is the front-facing speakers, the sound in general on the device. On the HTC One, down here on the back, you'll notice there's a Beats Audio logo, big bright red logo. You don't see it here, and that's because it does not have that Beats Audio built in. Beats Audio, as explained by MKBHD, is for the most part hype. You've got a lot of equalizer with a little bit maybe of extra hardware to it. But honestly, in comparing the two, my wife has the HTC One and I was holding the HTC One Max just next to each other. The HTC One seems to have more of a full bassy sound, which you would expect because it's Beats. But just on the normal music that I listen to, it does sound kind of flat and more tinny on these speakers on the HTC One Max. On the One, of course, it does sound more full. It sounds, you know, something you hear in a club almost. Now, I will say, whenever I plugged my headphones into both of them, they sounded pretty similar. The Beats Audio on the HTC One, it seemed to make a little bit of a difference in terms of the equalizer, but it didn't make a huge difference. Definitely not as huge a difference as there was between these speakers and the ones on the HTC One. So do keep that in mind. If you're buying it to use as a media consumption device where you're going to be using these front-facing speakers a lot, they're not going to sound quite as good as the ones on the HTC One. They still call it boom sound, but it doesn't quite boom as much. I would love to give a demonstration of it, but really anything I would have that could demonstrate it is going to be something that is going to be copyright protected, and I'm going to get this video flagged and taken down. And actually, the one thing I forgot to mention that's definitely a big difference between the HTC One and the Max is the battery life. I kind of mentioned it briefly in the beginning. 2300 milliamp hours versus 3300 milliamp hours in the Max. definitely makes a pretty decent difference. Using it quite a bit during the day, email, web browsing, listening to music, watching videos, playing games, lots of everything that I would throw at it. I was able to survive 2 full days. I think it was 2 days and 2 hours I made it, and I still had like 10-15% battery life left before I finally just stuck it on a charger and said forget it. Now those of you who are extremely heavy users, people that play video games for hours and hours on end, it may not last that long for you, obviously. If you talk on the phone for 10 hours a day, it's definitely not going to last that long for you. But if you, like me, tend to do just a lot of internet and email and app usage and some gaming, some YouTube watching, lots of music listening, and I'm talking like 2 hours a day of music, probably. And it works pretty well for that, for long periods of time. My biggest problem with the device, and this is the same problem that I had with the Oppo N1, is just the size. And that's my personal preference. I'm not a huge fan of holding a device in one hand and not being able to reach anywhere on the screen for fear of dropping it because it's just so big. I have to kind of prop a pinky finger under it and then I can't actually get to anywhere on the screen. That's my preference. For a lot of people, they just prefer to use it with 2 hands, but even with 2 hands, at this size, you're kind of going to be limited to reach the top of the screen. It's doable. It's not a big deal. More often than not, I hold it one-handed and I'll swipe type, and then I can, do everything with one hand while I hold it with the other. So it does definitely work. So of course, just to quickly recap the biggest differences here: screen size with lower pixel density, front-facing speakers not quite as good, maybe a little bit more flat sounding, battery is much larger, fingerprint sensor, micro SD card slot. Honestly, that's a bit of a give and take. It sort of depends on your real preference. If I had to choose between the HTC One and the HTC One Max, of course I would take the One, although I would prefer it to have a slightly larger battery. But this is definitely not a bad option. Still has specs that are pretty competitive with all of the best phones on the market, and it is one of the biggest phones on the market. So if you're into big phones, if you're not wanting to have a small phone and a tablet, if you want something that's in between that'll accomplish both tasks, this is definitely an excellent option for you. But I think that's going to be about all from me for today. Like I said, I've said most of what I wanted to say about this in the HTC One review, so you can take a look at that one for all the details there. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thanks again to Verizon for sending this out to review. I'll be sending it back out tomorrow. Look forward to more content coming from CES. I'll probably be doing a video showing just everything I'm going to be packing in my bags to take to CES in terms of electronics, because that might be interesting. But I'll see you guys again in a few days, probably. Bye guys.